Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering What We Do in the Shadows. Season 5, episode, what is this, 7? Hybrid Creatures. In this episode, I don't like this one, guys. These creatures are too creepy. No. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Max for commissioning this episode. Y'all, this one is so here's the thing. And I know there are people like me out there who will get this. And then there are people for whom this is so nothing that they will really be like, stop being such a baby. I am a very, very visual person. Things that are not beautiful hurt me to look at. And I mean this in the most dramatic and literal way that I can explain. I hate ugliness, especially ugliness that is like easily remedied. You know, it bothers me, and I feel much calmer and more at peace when everything around me is tidy and lovely. And this is part of the reason why my aesthetic is so precise, because I need it to be that way for my brain to relax. Like right now, from where I'm sitting, I have my lovely planner that is so pretty. I have my tea set that is like all, you know, it's this like complete set and it's all very beautiful. I have a cup right here that is a sleek, simple design that I love looking at. It's just so like self-contained and pretty. The colors, everything about my space is very, very carefully picked out. And I have always, from a child, had a really knee-jerk reaction to combination of ugly look and upsetting like story or behavior. There have been a lot of movies as a little kid that I couldn't watch because they like upset me in such a visceral way. And I seemed to be very alone in that. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, for example. I burst into tears during that movie and couldn't finish it because it was freaking me out so bad. And there's just a lot, like the Garbage Pail Kids is one that Owen brought up while we were watching this episode. And I was like, oh my God, yes. So I know I said last episode, I want to see more of these like weird frogs with Guillermo's hair and see how they like interact with the household and if they're still around and stuff. I meant that in that exact sort of like scale. These little weird frogs that are flying around the house are the perfect amount of weird that I can cope with, that don't take up too much space, and they're not hideous enough to bother me. These hybrid creatures that we wind up with in this episode are so deeply upsetting to look at, to hear talk, to watch move around. And then there's the whole, like, you've got to kill them aspect of it, which shouldn't be as upsetting as it is for me, but it bothered me, you guys. It really, really did. It was like a combo of the fact that he is expected to kill them when they're like live things that look like him, and just the whole, like, you know, that aspect of it. But also the fact that we find out these creatures are conscious enough to know what's happening to them. So at one point, they're all like outside, lined up against a wall, trembling in fear as he brandishes a pistol. And I'm so sorry, I couldn't find this funny. It was just upsetting to me. And, you know, if it were a person who's trembling because there's a vampire about to kill them, that's just a whole different tone. You know, the vampires aren't real. The person is one of many victims that we have seen of their type. The vampires kill people constantly, so we're very used to seeing that. And there is a campiness to that feels so removed. But these are like pets, you know? And the killing with a pistol is too real. I know people who have had to put their own animals down with guns. This is a reality of, like, having worked on farms and stuff. This happens. And you guys, I really wanted this to not bother me as much as it did. But they are so weird looking. Like, I've got to give some props to whoever did the makeup in this episode. Wow. Like, especially the dog creature. I don't know if it's all makeup. It very well may be like some makeup and then we do post CGI stuff. It doesn't matter because it looks excellent, like practically seamless. And yet it's horrible. So from the moment that we see them, my whole self like rejected this storyline, these characters. I was not here for it. And every time we left this plot and went to something else in the episode, I felt this surge of relief. And then every time we came back to it, it was just dread. Like this terrible feeling of like overwhelming, I don't want to see where we're going with this. And, you know, to be fair, in the end, what he winds up doing with them, with like finding them a place at this old folks home, it was like a pretty happy ending, like as happy as you're probably going to get with a storyline that starts off this way. So I'm not trying to say that like the story ended up being as upsetting as it seemed like it was going to be, but it was that feeling of dread. And it's also like the anxiety aspect of the fact that like Laszlo's doing this without Guillermo even knowing about it. And then as soon as shit begins to go left, Laszlo wants nothing to do with it anymore and is like, I can't kill them. You're going to have to do it. And that Guillermo is now like put in this position through no fault of his own. He didn't ask for Laszlo to make these weird little fucking creatures. And yet he is now expected to basically commit murder. And they're these creatures that like worship him. I mean, this is a nightmare. This is a literal nightmare. He's talking to one of them and they're discussing like the prophecy of one who, you know, the one who was like the original and all this stuff. He's a god to them. And so like they take it as a sort of matter of course that their lives belong to him. And even though they don't want to die and are terrified, they are just like willing to stand there and allow it to happen. I hate all of this. I hate all of this. It's, I just really do, guys. It's like, and then also just the experimenting with animals aspect of it, which is again, something that's like all too real and a genuine like issue. And we just got this stew of particular like fears, and I don't want to go so far as to say triggers because that's too dramatic, but just like all of this was like a mixture of my least favorite tropes and aesthetics and everything. So forgive me, you guys, for not being a good sport about this one. Mostly this show has been a big hit for me. There have been some episodes that really failed, but considering like what the premise of the show is, it's a lot better than you would ever expect for a show that is about modern vampires that's a comedy in Staten Island that's gone on for 5 seasons. Like, you wouldn't expect this to have maintained the level of quality that it has. They're just not all going to be winners. And like I said in the beginning, I know I am particularly sensitive to certain things in a way that doesn't bother other people. Excuse me. This is part of why I'm like not great with watching horror movies as well. It's not just like the fear aspect. It's also in horror movies, like the aesthetic, understandably, often has to be off-putting. And it's actually hard to watch for me. And I don't know if that ties in with sort of like a obsessive compulsive thing that I've got, because I definitely have like a touch of this where I have to like fix and change things and get them to look a certain way. But that feeling that people who are OCD describe of like, I need to like step in the room for 3 times or else something bad will happen. That's kind of the way that I am with things looking a certain way. Is like, if it doesn't, like, if I am not able to make things nice, there's almost a sense of danger for me. You know what I'm saying? And I know that sounds super dramatic, and I'm aware that it's dramatic. I know that about myself at this point, that like, I can't help the reaction that I have. I don't know exactly where it comes from, but it's not something that I can change about myself. And it is very specific in a way that I have found only a couple people in my life understand. And so when I have this sort of response to things, I immediately recognize what's happening inside myself. And I know that from here on, I'm not watching this in good faith, that I have had a sort of like immediate response that's going to color the way that I see the rest of the thing, and that I have to take that into account with the way that I feel at the end of the episode. Just recognize the fact that like, I wasn't able to watch this like as impartially as I normally am, because I was so affected by various aspects of it that it just kind of tainted everything for me. So anyway, this is something, you know, like, we all have our things, right? And part of the aspect that I have also brought up in other episodes is like a real knee-jerk reaction that I have to the concept of like medical torture on human beings as well. We have like experimenting on animals, but this is a very different thing than what I mean here, which is just like, especially in horror movies, or when you're talking about like hauntings and stuff, if those hauntings went on in like a hospital, the way that we have treated patients, either people who have mental illness or people who were not white or not men, we have put people historically through truly hideous tortures in the name of medical science. And I have a reaction to that. I'm able to turn that off in a lot of this show. For example, when we're doing like weird shit with Laszlo and Colin and Nandor, because they're not people. And so for me, you know, being vampires, and there's a completely different threshold, and it's done in such a campy way, I can just divorce that from my reaction. For whatever reason, I couldn't do that. And I think that Guillermo is just always in this position of having to like put fires out, that I felt so terrible for him in this episode of having to be the one to fucking cope with this situation. You know, again, it just seemed like always there's something, and this was a particularly cruel one. So all that said off the top, we have to like get into what's going on with Nadja. So Nadja has this history. She tells this story about how she was basically really, really disruptive when she was a kid in the little schoolhouse that her village had set up. And they kicked her out eventually because fucking nobody could focus with her around. As somebody who was like a pretty quiet kid mostly, I would be the kind of person who would be like, get out. And in response to being kicked out, she burns the place down. Iconic. And thankfully, like, nobody was hurt, but it was just like the building was no longer there. And as she puts it, nobody ever learned anything ever again in my village. Like, they don't try to keep teaching them in another location or rebuild or anything. That was just like the end of it, which is the sort of thing that feels silly, but also I could see that really happening where if there's not enough resources or enough interest, if the benefits don't feel like they're outweighing the amount of work you're putting into it, yeah, you're just going to be like, all right, well, we tried it. I guess that was a no. So back to the fields with you. The children long for the mines. So what she's thinking is that this hex that's on her, she can resolve by teaching a class. And so she is teaching like a group of people who are from Little Antipaxos about American culture. And there's a point where she's got a map of the US divided into 3 sections. All of the east is Staten Island, all of the west is Hollywood, and everything in the middle is Texas. And she just points at them and says, films, newspapers, and then to Texas, beef. Which honestly is pretty on point. It's hard to get mad at this. Sometimes people are just correct, you know? And it's like, I'm sure there would be plenty of people that would have issues with this. I can't support their arguments. This is just so in my bones as an American true. I have to support it. And she's like singing the Colonial Patriot Hymn, which is the song of the nation. Burgers and fries, Mickey Mouse, Mount Rushmore. And she's like swinging above her head as if she's got a lariat, what do you call it? I keep wanting to say a noose, which like essentially is what it is, but you know what I'm talking, a lasso. And you guys, this is the sort of thing where I feel like these jokes, they shouldn't be funny anymore. Like, what I mean by this is jokes about the way the world sees the United States have been done a billion times. And how many new ways can you find to get this across? But what they've done, interestingly here, is because she's a vampire, there's like this extra layer of disconnect, so it gives it just enough of a fresh spin that it doesn't feel super tired. So I go into this scene a little bit like, oh, we're doing these kinds of jokes, okay. And kind of felt like I was sitting back with my arms crossed going, impress me. And then they did a little bit. Like, this did keep being funny. The Mickey Mouse Mount Rushmore, you know, jokes about American fatty food, very, very, like, low-hanging fruit, bottom tier. But then you get into, like, the corporatism aspect with Mickey Mouse, the nationalism and the desecration of like native lands with Mount Rushmore. And it feels very concise and yet like hitting all the points if you really stop and think about it. And I was sort of like, these are pretty solid jokes, actually. I'm kind of down with this. And then she has the Thanksgiving, where this is like just chef's kiss. Gorgeous. She's got a frozen solid turkey sitting on a mat in the middle of this otherwise like almost completely empty table. Solidly frozen, right? And then sheet pans of raw potatoes and carrots, straight up raw. And then the camera pulls out and everybody is wearing football helmets. And she is explaining to them that that this is like when you worship the turkey and that they should blow it kisses. I am very into this as an overall concept. Thanksgiving is super problematic we all know, like, the origins of it are a lie. The whole way that this has been, like, structured in the U.S. was part of this weird fantasy that we perpetrated as whites about the relationship between white people and the native people. And I very much respect anybody who's like, I just don't celebrate it. I would very much like to, like, give up on it, to be honest, but because I have family that is still super into it, it's just not really an option for me to completely pass it over. But I have decided, like, in my household, we're going to be doing much more like of a Mabon thing and not Thanksgiving the same way that we had used to. But the idea that, like, looking at it from the outside, it's about worshiping a turkey, and that she, as a vampire, doesn't get that this food needs to be cooked, because they never get that. They do not understand how people eat. Like, all of this combination, and then, like, the football thing, where I don't know if she's aware of, like, the point of the connection with football and Thanksgiving, but the helmets just feels like, oh, well, you know, I did a thing, in the kind of way that, like, somebody who is trying to understand a culture in another country, but read stuff that they didn't fully understand the language of that material from in the beginning. It feels like that, like just a mistranslation of a lot of stuff. And the way that all of these people who are gathered around here are playing it very seriously. They are not doubting what she's telling them at all. They're full on going for it, and they have great deadpan faces and seem so, like, sincere about it. And it just makes these scenes work really, really well. So this is when we go to, like, the guide looking at this picture that showed up in the house that was what tipped them off about this hex, which I don't recall if we have ever had confirmation that she placed this here, but I think she did, right? But yeah, she discovers something that via, like, the use of what looks to be lemon juice, where you hold it over a flame and then words begin to appear. For those you've burned, you must atone. And so she thinks that the burning thing is about the burning of the school, when really it could be like, burning is a metaphor a lot of the time for leaving somebody hanging or screwing somebody over, anything like that. So we get this, like, really amazing, oh my god, I forgot about, like, the talking about the water cooler around, and how Colin and Nandor, they came in to sit in on her class one time, and she just wanted that initially to make it seem like there's enough people here that I won't get fired, that they'll let me do the class. But evidently these two won't get lost now. So she's just having to deal with them, sort of, like, asking weird questions and stuff in the back. And I love the direction that things go with Colin. Like, Owen asked me the other day, which one of the vampires is your favorite? And before this episode, I was saying Laszlo. At this point, I'm like, I don't know, Laszlo. This is pretty fucking awful. But Laszlo is just somebody who has a really interesting value system and a very inquisitive mind in a way that I appreciate and that can be really fun to watch. Owen said Colin, because the jokes surrounding Colin always tend to be really, like, different from episode to episode, but they all follow the same general theme. It's just the way that the writers find new ways to express this type of personality it's extremely fun to watch them, like, find ways to do it. And yeah, this episode, it's like he and Nandor get given the assignment of, like, running the class. And so Colin decides to play the role of cool teacher. I feel very lucky. I have never encountered the cool teacher. And you really would have thought I would, because I went to my senior year of school at a private arts-based boarding school in Southern California. There is no more ripe of a recipe for the cool teacher. And yet, I was really blessed. And all of my teachers were actually genuinely cool because they did not try. They were just passionate about the thing that they taught. And that translates into being cool because that's just how that works. Or they were simply like your typical teacher, and this happened to be the school that they worked at, and there was not really a feel to them that was different. The way that Colin plays this, I found so fascinating because it's like, again, not something that I have run into, but I know it exists. And it's the sort of thing that I could easily have seen myself falling into this trap, you know? But like, the closest I ever came was probably when I went to school the first year that I was in college at Carnegie Mellon. I had a teacher for a playwriting class, and part of the playwriting was reading plays as well. And this teacher wanted very much to not only be cool, but also like edgy in a way that was appropriate for the time, 2003, 2004. We're talking the type of jokes that are actually like really fucked up when you look back at them. Shit that was like sexist, vaguely sexual harassy, definitely like borderline racist, just all that sort of like the way that Colin is playing it is he's doing much more of a like woke thing where it's about, history is written by the victors and blah, blah, blah. So he's trying to be a little bit like, again, anti-establishment. And that it's so interesting to me how anti-establishment looks so different 20 years on from what it looked like when I was in school, because it used to be a lot more mean-spirited and a lot more like, kind of almost like bullying to other students and stuff in a way that was like, oh, I'm one of you guys. I'm cool like you because I also see who the losers are. And, that sort of like weird alignment that some teachers have where they're like, I have to be your friend. And now I could see it like definitely being a lot more like overwoke white liberal nonsense where it's like technically what you're saying isn't untrue, but the way that you're waving it around feels very performative and like you're not trying to teach anything. You're just trying to show off the fact that you're above it all, which has a very different vibe to it. And the teacher that I had, those type of jokes were combined, unfortunately, with a alcoholic personality. So this dude would show up to class hammered, and he really thought we couldn't tell. He really did. He would go up and do these lectures that were meandering and slurred, and he thought that he was like either pulling it off or the fact that he was drunk we would find somehow amusing. And we were the wrong type of class to come at with that energy, because when you're at a school like Carnegie Mellon and you are taking classes that are required for like one of the harder majors, tech theater was grueling. You've got a lot of overachiever kids that take their own education quite seriously and take themselves seriously. So none of us would like ever show up to class drunk, even though that's kind of a joke amongst like college kids for a lot of other schools and friends that I have talked to. And so we wound up reporting him because we were just like, we're paying a lot of money for this class and you're not even having the decency to come in and be fucking coherent. Like, why am I wasting my time? So yeah, it was like, that's the only time that I've really come close to this sort of attitude. And seeing the way that Colin, like, he's wearing the Trilby hat and he's got his feet up on the desk. At one point he's wearing some shorts and he has his like knees pulled up so that one of his balls is hanging out. That I have encountered, not in a teacher, but a person. And I genuinely do not think he realized. With Colin, he 100% realizes. Like, he's doing this on purpose. Of course he is. But actually, I said it wasn't a teacher. I'm remembering now. No, it was an art teacher. It was an art teacher. He was great too. He was like a really funny, like very hippie guy. One of those where he definitely smoked a ton of weed, but he was also like a runner. And so the shorts he would wear were those like really high cut running shorts. And yeah, he thought those did more than they did. I forgot about that until just now. And it was the sort of thing that, like, even though everybody was a bit freaked out by it, nobody thought he was like a creep because his energy otherwise was so harmless. And now I'm like, I wonder if he would have been able to get away with that today. You know, probably not. But I just really like the fact that, like, there's a combo here of Colin attempting to be this cool teacher, and then Nandor trying to get everybody to focus solely on like the history of his own peoples and those who, you know, he finds to be like worthy. And we get this amazing little twist where I think they don't even like set it up. It's just that Nandor goes in and glamours the guards to make them fall asleep. But they go into like this museum about the immigrant experience on Staten Island. And as soon as we saw the outfit, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be Nandor's clothes. Like, this is going to be his stuff. I didn't realize there was going to be a whole journal thing, which was genius. But the way that this turns up, it takes Nandor a minute to understand that not only are these his clothing, but like his underwear has his name written on the inside. Amazing. And then the people who translated his journal straight up think that he was writing erotic fiction because the shit he wrote about was so outlandish. Not just because of probably the sheer number of partners that he had ever slept with, but also he was like talking about fucking in midair and stuff because he's a vampire and he could literally do that. They don't get that. So they're talking about it being like one of the first examples of erotic fiction that they have found. And I love that the paragraph about this wraps up with them saying that it's probable the person who wrote all of this was a virgin, because they just seem to have no real idea of how sex works. And truly, you guys, I found that really funny. Like, this is something that I'm sure we have all run into on the interwebs. People who say shit about sex that you're like, you're not serious, right? You know that's not how that works, right? And it's the sort of thing where you can't decide what you would rather be true. Do you want them to be a real person who is genuinely making this comment because they believe it, or do you want them to be like somebody trolling who isn't this stupid? Because sometimes it's like, when you're a woman especially, two factors come into play. One, the fact that straight women are like only orgasm during sex like 30% of the time. It's a really low percentage of the time because men do not make an effort to understand our bodies and how they work. And two, that our reproductive rights are always being challenged by dudes who do not know the first thing about how ovaries and wombs and vaginas work. And so you have these dudes out here saying shit and it makes you want to facepalm because you're like, and you are part of the like ruling gender who decides if I am going to be forced to carry a baby to term. Wow, this is so depressing. So anyway, this bit with like, and how upset Nandor gets about it, and he feels like he's being personally mocked in this targeted sort of way. There's even this medallion that they show as like a superstitious trinket to comfort the you know, ignorant peasant who was coming over the water. And he's just like, that was a keychain given to me by my mommy. And I love the way he says mommy. It was so, the delivery on that was perfect. I love this sort of thing as well. When something has been removed from history to a degree that, like, you can understand why the interpretations that were made, but when they're given a different context, it's like, oh, yeah, we like ascribed a certain level of meaning that might not necessarily have been there, or it was like a deeply personal meaning and not like a universal thing. I don't know if any of you guys have ever 30 Rock in many ways has not aged well, but there are some real gems still buried in there. And one of my favorite bits is when Liz gets the opportunity to do an advice show called That's a Deal Breaker. And she gets women like telling her situations with their significant others, usually men, and she tells them what they should do about it. And these women are coming to her with what seem like very open and shut situations. So Tracy Jordan's wife comes in and says that she found out her husband is booking a hotel room once a week. And of course, the assumption is that he's having an affair. And it turns out he can't take a shit in private with his kids at home. So he like waits all week and then books a hotel room so that he can go take a shit alone and just take his time and hang out in there and have the whole bathroom to himself. And like just things like that where from the outside you're like, oh, I get why you thought XYZ. I would too. But then the explanation is something that's like, you know, completely understandable and very different. That's like one of my very favorite types of jokes. And this just really reminded me of that, like the ways in which everything got misinterpreted. And, you know, Nandor's sitting here like, no, it's this. And you're like, oh, that makes sense too. The other thing also honestly did make sense to me as well. But, you know, and it's a combo of like them getting it wrong and the way that they describe him as being basically like a fucking hayseed, you know? He's from a different country, so when you think hayseed, you really think like Southern American, but it's the equivalent sort of rubish, wide-eyed, fucking, I don't know anything about the world kind of innocent. And knowing that, like, by the time he came here, he was already a vampire. Like, this dude is, don't get me wrong, a goddamn fool, even now. But they just had the wrong idea about who he was as a person, and the condescension in the tone with which they write about him, I would also find infuriating and like deeply insulting. So I just really loved this. And eventually what Colin does is he changes up Nandor's display in the museum so that he's got like a man and woman in underwear like up next to him, and he's wearing these really cool modern clothes, and the description of him makes him seem like this totally rad dude. And I love the fact that like Colin Robinson does this because he can tell Nandor's upset by it, even though the thing with Colin Robinson is feeding off of people being frustrated or upset. He like sometimes cares enough in a way that is truly surprising every time. You know, he just comes out of the woodwork doing something nice for somebody and you're like, oh, well, that's nice. And Nandor thanking him and being like, you're a good friend. And immediately Colin pulls back and is like, this is awkward, and gets out of there. I really like that. I thought that was all extremely well done. Oh my God, Colin talking about how he went to that writing group. I wrote a poem called An Ode to My Father's Masculinity, Easy Drain. Oh my God. Then the talk around the water cooler. How many people did you have sex with this weekend? And the woman says 7. And the man in the middle, whose arms are out, says 1. And Nadja has to chime in with, no, water cooler does not talk. Write that down. And she storms out. This bit with the guy just playing the water cooler between them. Beautiful. So she's in the hallway And she's saying, I don't know, maybe I'm not very good at this. But she's also, I am worried that, like, how am I supposed to get rid of this fucking hex? And this woman turns up in the hall behind her. I don't know if I have seen this actress in other stuff. I must have done. But she has a fabulous look about her. First of all, amazing hair. Loving it. Really am. She's got like a shawl draped over this jacket, so it gives her just enough of a sort of like bohemian look. But she has clearly overheard Nadja talking about this hex and has decided to like use this for her own ends. And I was really delighted with the direction this went in because, of course, I hear a woman scamming somebody else talking about a hex and pretending that she knows something about it. And I'm thinking she's going to be trying to play Nadja to get money out of her. And like indirectly that is sort of it, but what she does, a woman after my own heart, truly she is. She got kicked out of Dunkin' Donuts. She names them specifically and banned. And there's like a picture of her later on when Nadja goes in that is taped up and says, "Do not serve this woman." I can't remember what it is that she says she's done. But what she tells Nadja repeatedly is that she needs donuts in order to help lift this curse. And she's doing the most half-assed job at pretending to be a witch. Because, of course, Nadja right away is willing to believe that, I am, what does she say? She first starts off with, like, I see something around you, a dark spectral specter. I love her, how she's really not trying even that hard. And she says, "My name's Helen." Oh, just Helen? That's it? I thought it would be Helen the Magic Woman. Oh my God. So later on, she's like, "Oh, well, your name, it says here, is Helen Johnson?" And she's like, "Oh yes, well, my full name is Helen the Magic Johnson," which is funny in like so many ways. That really cracked me up. That one really got me, you guys. But anyway, so she is like changing up what Nadja needs to get for her. Every time that she like finishes one donut, she needs another one, wants more of them, increases the order, sends her back out again. At one point, she like is like, "Oh, I need to, enough donuts to put in this pot or into a pot." And Nadja's like, "Do you mean like a cauldron?" And she's like, yeah, that. And it's like, she's not even trying to make this seem believable. Nadja is just so prepared out of the gate to believe it that she's filling in the gaps for her, which is actually a really, like, that's when you have succeeded in really conning somebody, is when they are explaining away the holes in your own story for you. I mean, that's just the pinnacle. Here it is. Yeah. I need an eye of newt, a black cat's whisker, and a dozen first, it's just a chocolate glaze from the Dunkin' on Forest Avenue. And she says, "Is this an enchanted forest?" And she explains, "No, it's a pastry shop. They're what in these modern times are called donuts." "Why would you need a donut?" Normally, I would require you to retrieve the sweetest flower from the peak of Mount Juktas. But honestly, it tastes a lot like a donut. So, amazing. There's something about the fact that she like comes up with these little things here and there that feel like maybe you are trying. And then, you think I can put this in my big bowl? Because Nadja brings back a white frosted sprinkle donut instead of a chocolate glazed. I'm just going to say, I am the type of person that if I can't have almost exactly what I asked for in the first place, most of the time, I would rather have nothing. So yeah, if I ask for a chocolate glaze and you come home with a vanilla frosting and sprinkles, that's like almost the polar opposite. Just don't do it. Don't bother. It's just not worth it. I want what I want. If I can't have what I want, fine, I can't have it. But like getting a half measure is so much worse somehow, you know? Especially because as the person on the receiving end, you see that person come in with a bag and you fully anticipate that they were able to do the thing. So now you get your hopes up and then they have to tell you what's in this bag isn't what you think it's going to be. The worst. Just yeah. Do you mean a cauldron? Yes, that's the word. You're going to have to go back out. Why don't you also grab me? And she has this list on her phone. 3 Boston creams, 3 chocolate glazed, 4 jelly, and 5 glazed crullers. And I personally have always been a major fan of Boston cream. Curious what the audience's favorite donuts are. I also used to, back in the day, really like Dunkin' Donuts coffee rolls. The thing is now, Dunkin' Donuts does not make their donuts on premises anymore. When I was young, they made everything in-house, and so their flavor was unparalleled. They were just as good as a Krispy Kreme. Nowadays, Dunkin' stuff is all shipped, and it's got this really stale, preservative-heavy flavor to it. It sucks. And the coffee rolls used to be like the size of like a cocktail plate. They were big. And now they're the size of like a regular donut, which is likely better for our health. But also they're so much more just ordinary. And I saw them. I hadn't been to a Dunkin' in ages, and I found one here in Texas. They're very rare down here. They're here, but you don't see them often. And I saw it and I was like, oh, this is just like the saddest shadow of what the coffee roll used to be. So anyway, not just saying, I don't know much about hexes or how to get rid of them. Maybe the donut is something to do with the circle of life. Also, Helen said she had this magic wand for thousands of years, but I'm pretty sure I saw her go outside and pick up a stick off the ground. And we see Helen with this stick, and she's just put the donut over it, and she's just eating it from the stick. I mean, just the joy that she's taking in eating this. And I also just really want to say thank you to the show in general. And this is such a low bar, but I have to mention it. She isn't fat. You know, so many shows from a very short time ago to now, like, we have really finally started to get maybe the fat jokes with people eating a lot is not the best. Maybe we just kind of shouldn't. And it's really wild looking at some of the shows that have had a great track record for the most part and how much they have managed to like fuck it up in terms of that sort of thing. Like Brooklyn Nine-Nine, there's an episode in the first season where a fat man has been murdered and the fat jokes are unbelievable. Like I can't watch the episode anymore. I have to skip it. And now I know that they wouldn't have done those jokes. I'm sure they kind of regret that episode. But at the time, it was like nobody thought anything of it. And it would have been, I feel like, a similar episode to this set 5, 6 years ago, 10 years ago. She would absolutely have been a fat woman. No question. Instead, they have cast a woman who is like almost willowy. She's very slender. And I just really appreciate that because like, people can be big eaters and not be fat. There are all different types of body types out there. And depending on what people do in their spare time for exercise or what their metabolism is like, it's just not going to like sit on them the same way. So anyway, oh my God, I forgot about the fact that Colin has brought an acoustic guitar and he's going to play Night Swimming by REM. Oh my God, this dude. We're having a class on the quad, man. Kind of a college tradition. I catch your drift, though. How about we get the old blood pumping with some hacky sack? Oh my God. Hacky sack? Did you ever play this? I could not do it, but the stoners at my school were kind of incredible. Like, I would just sit outside and watch them, and considering the fact that they were, like, otherwise pretty lazy in the way they approached their lives, the dedication to perfecting shit with hacky sack was truly something to see. So anyway, this is when they go into the museums. I forgot about this. Nadja threatens to like stop working with Helen, and she pretends that the hex is growing so overpowering that she is going to like probably be killed and not be able to save Nadja. Eventually gets Nadja to go get some munchkins, powdered ones, like the powdered sugar. The powder represents the ashes of your ancestors. Oh my God. So this is when Nadja goes into the Dunkin' and she sees the, flyer, do not serve. And she's like, this is my friend. How do you know Helen? And this girl says, I guess I know her from like harassing me and my coworkers. That's mainly how. So harassing, it's very vague. I'd really like a little bit more detail on what she did. I'm assuming that it's just sort of wanting free stuff or like camping out inside the Dunkin' Donuts and, I don't know. But this is when Nadja goes back and flings this flyer down in front of her and is like, well, you said you were the magic woman and this is, and she tries to play it off as, oh, well, this is textbook hex. This solution is a strawberry, and Nadja starts to leave, and she says, you have no idea what it's like to not be allowed back to the one place you feel at home. And Nadja, when she's doing the talking heads thing, is like, I do know that feeling. I was driven out of my village. It ain't great. My hex may not have been lifted, but with just a little hypnosis, at least Helen's has been. And we see Helen inside the Dunkin' Donuts, reclining on the counter with her head on the cash register, and just the girl behind the counter feeding her munchkins, like when they dangle grapes above a person's head in cartoons and have giant feather fans to indicate that this person is really living the fucking life. Honestly, I loved this ending because Nadja is so all over the place with how much she gives a shit about people. There are times where she's sort of like the way that Colin was this episode, where he did something nice at the end and you're like, oh, you just, there'll be people with things that are totally valid, like concerns and problems, and she's like, shut the fuck up, oh my God, stop whining. But then, in the first season, she turns that college girl and teaches her how to be a vampire and seems to actually take an interest. And this woman, she's just like, let me set you up so that you get your heart's desire for the rest of your life. And who knows how long this lasts, what happens when this poor girl behind the counter who's been mesmerized gets seen by her superior and fired. But in the short term, it's really adorable. And she says, you do not need to be sad anymore, and gives the camera this little look, and it's truly precious. I really enjoyed this. So anyway, I'm sorry, you guys. I forgot about the moment where Guillermo is just pretending to shoot these creatures, and he shoots into the sky and without meaning to kills a bunch of what seem to be seagulls, and the dog creature darts forward and grabs one, and he's like, no, drop it. That is too real. That is too real. Pippin the other day, you guys, oh my God. You ever have these moments where you're just like, the realization of what's happening comes over you and there's just this thrill of horror? He like ducked into the shrubs and he came running out and I'm like, what is that? And I realized too late that it was like the desiccated carcass of a dead squirrel. And it was pretty much almost all gone except for the skin. And you could see the whole white of its spine vertebrae. And he had like grabbed it by the head and trotted into the yard with all of its like spine bones sticking out of his mouth. And it took me a second to like make sense of what I was seeing. And then I was like, oh God. And it was the kind of thing where I know I should take this away from you, but I don't want to touch it either. So what do I do? And like, I went in the house and I found like gardening gloves and I came out and he had eaten it already. I like, it was gone. I looked all over. I don't know what he did, if he actually like straight up ate it or if he just sort of tore it apart and the parts were so small I couldn't find them. And even though I was like, I should be worried that you maybe ate that, all I could feel was relief that I wasn't going to have to touch it or deal with it in any way, you know? Anyway, yeah. So that bit just got me a little bit. Oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot that Colin said I stole the key ring that your mommy gave you from the museum. And I also took the liberty, and he shows Nandor the footage of somebody like taking video. I really like the way that this is done because somebody's at this museum and they're filming and there's an adult present, but she is very clearly glued to her phone and not paying any attention. So this kid is reading highly questionable material, but the person who should be noticing that isn't at all. Set the world's record for having the most constant sexual intercourse, often while flying, and he was never scared of boat rides. It's really funny. And Colin ends it with, you know, history is a construct. So yeah, the episode, like the very, very end is when we see all of the weird little creatures that were brought to the old folks' home. And oh, that's right. Gizmo, as he's called, is out here. He's keeping Binky. It was hard for me to see. Is Binky the frog, or it almost looks like a fish? I can't tell. I think it's a fish. And then Laszlo interrupts and is like, what are you doing out here? Having a wank? He just says having a wank to fucking everything. And Guillermo just says, oh no, he says, what are you doing out here? And Guillermo says, having a wank. Ah, good man. Carry on. Oh my God, this fish, you guys. I don't want him to have kept this fish. He's horrifying. Oh my God, I just hated it. I just saw its face and I wish I hadn't. I just hated it so much. Oh no. Cassie's in the chat saying, we found an empty tortoise shell in our backyard once. My dog got sick for a few days. Not sure if the two were related. Oh God, I'm so sorry. It's always like, would I even want to know if I had the option to find out? Would I want to? One time, Pippin, we were at the park and there was like a little gap in the fence that went into a basically woodsy area. He darted back there and it was not big enough for me to get in after him. So I just had to call him and wait. I almost went home and got some food or something to try and lure him out. But he finally came out and he's got something in his mouth. He trots up and puts it down. And it's a fucking tortoise. It's alive. And the poor little guy was probably terrified being trotted through the forest in the dog's mouth. And its little head and arms and legs were retracted. Because when he put it down at first, I was like, oh, did he find an empty shell? I picked it up and the shit was heavy. And I looked in and saw its little head and I was like, oh my God. And so I had to put it down and just be like, no, don't bother these poor animals. But yeah, I often wonder if he had been left to his own devices, would he have eventually killed it? Like, I don't know what his reaction would be. He seems to have a strong prey drive sometimes, and then he doesn't seem to know what to do. He'll chase the cats, and then he stops short and seems confused. And I'm like, if he ever got a hold of a squirrel, would he kill the squirrel? Would he back off? Like, I don't know what, Anyway, that's how the episode ended. Didn't love this one, you guys. Like I said, sorry to be a bummer at the beginning, but these creatures are horrible looking. It's like something out of a nightmare. And the fact that the one that we kept around is a fish with a person's face. I mean, this is like some Hieronymus Bosch shit. I don't like it. I hope we never see this fucking fish again. All right. Thank you all again. Until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.